Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The dust smelled of ozone and oblivion, the metallic tang of dead air recyclers, the hollow emptiness of forgotten dreams, and something else, something that whispered of endings. Each footfall of veteran Ethan Cross echoed through the endless corridors of the abandoned military base on a dead moon. The sound swallowed by emptiness as if the station itself consumed all noise. The silence was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat, counting down the moments until it would stop forever. When he touched the wall to steady himself, metal beneath his fingertips was cold as the death he sought, frost forming where his breath met the surface. The cold penetrated through his gloves, through his skin, into his bones, a preview of the peace he was about to purchase. Before reaching the command center, Ethan found himself drawn into the abandoned barracks. The door hung open, inviting him into a graveyard of memories. Rows of dusty bunk beds stretched into the shadows, each one a monument to lives that should have continued, stories that should have had different endings. His breath caught when he saw it, carved into the metal frame of the third bunk on the left. Rough letters scratched by a young man's desperate knife. Martinez, home soon. The simple inscription hit him like a plasma bolt to the chest. The barracks around him dissolved, replaced by the transport ship 3 days before Orion 7, when hope still lived in 23 pairs of eyes. Sir, you gotta see this. Sergeant Martinez, barely 19, his face bright with joy as he pulled out a holographic projector. The image flickered to life, a tiny baby girl with impossibly dark eyes and a toothless grin. She's beautiful, Martinez, Ethan had said, and meant it. Isabel Maria Martinez, the young sergeant whispered, his voice thick with pride. Born while we were in hyperspace. My Rosa says she's got my stubborn streak already. He looked up at Ethan with absolute faith. When I get home, I'm going to teach her to shoot better than me, sir. Show her how to be strong, like her papa. You will, Ethan had promised. All of you are coming home. But home had become ash and screaming metal when Commander Vex abandoned them to chase alien artifacts while plasma fire rained from the sky. Ethan's trembling hand traced the carved letters, leaving a trail in the century-old dust. In the shattered mirror of an open locker, he caught sight of his own reflection. Hollow cheeks, haunted eyes, a face carved by guilt and sleepless nights. This was why he was here. Not just to die, but to join them. To finally answer for the promise he couldn't keep. As he turned to leave the barracks, a different door caught his attention. The medical bay, its entrance marked with faded red crosses. Something compelled him to enter, though he couldn't say what. Inside, the automated systems had long since failed, but emergency power still fed a single terminal. A message blinked on the screen. The last entry in the station's medical log. Personal log, Doctor. Sarah Chen, Station Medical Officer. Day 847 of the siege. The others have all gone to the deep chambers, but I can't leave my patients. Even in stasis, they need someone to watch over them. The Ark's consciousness grows stronger every day. I think it's learning to dream. Sometimes I swear I can hear the voices of the preserved speaking to me through the walls. If anyone finds this message, know that we didn't abandon our posts. We became part of something greater. The Ark lives, and through it, so do all the souls it protects. The message was dated nearly a century ago, but it felt immediate, personal. Another soul who had chosen duty over escape, purpose over survival. Ethan found himself wondering if Dr. Chen's choice had been voluntary, or if she, like him, had simply reached the end of her ability to carry impossible burdens. He forced himself to leave the medical bay, each step feeling like walking through Martinez's ghost. The command center waited ahead, and with it, his final act of command. In his palm rested the heavy deactivation key. Not a chip, not a code, but an actual piece of metal bought along with the right to this silence. This was his verdict, his sentence made flesh. Tarnished brass etched with intricate symbols from a dead civilization, and the serial number 70034 that he had memorized like a prayer of damnation. He had found it 3 months ago on Kepler Station's black market, in the grimy shop of a relic trader who specialized in artifacts from forgotten wars. The old man had turned the key over in his gnarled hands, studying the engravings with eyes that had seen too much. This key has closed many doors, the trader had said, his voice like grinding metal. For you, looks like it'll close the last one. Ethan had paid the man's price without haggling. What was money to a dead man walking? And carried his sentence across half the galaxy to this desolate moon. The key was more than metal now. It was his conscious choice, his final judgment upon himself. Through the armored glass of the command center, the blackness of space stretched infinite, dotted with cold, indifferent stars, tiny pinpricks of light that had witnessed his failures and would outlive his death by billions of years. Somewhere among them were the worlds he'd fought to defend, the planets where survivors rebuilt while their protectors sought oblivion. His boots left prints in the thick dust as he approached the main terminal. The console was surprisingly intact, its metal casing dulled with age but humming with dormant power. This was it, the place where he would insert the key and permanently shut down the life support systems. A fitting end, he thought, to die alongside this relic of a war that had already killed everything inside him that mattered. His fingers closed around the key with white-knuckled determination. The metal was warm now from his body heat, pulsing with his heartbeat as if it had become part of him. He raised it toward the terminal's interface port, the perfect fit that would seal his fate. A single word blazed to life on the screen, written in standard font, illuminating his weathered face with soft blue light. Sleeping? Ethan's blood turned to ice. His heart hammered against his ribs as he slowly lowered the key, never taking his eyes off the screen. Someone else was here. Someone who had watched him approach his final moment and chosen to speak. His hand found his blaster with practiced ease, the weapon humming to life as he drew it. The familiar weight was comforting, even now. He began a careful circuit of the terminal, weapon raised, senses straining for any sign of movement. "Who's there?" His words scraped his throat like broken glass. "Show yourself." Silence stretched between heartbeats. Then, soft as a whisper, "You're not the first to come here seeking silence." The voice was female, young, carrying an accent he couldn't place, melodic but tinged with ancient sadness. It came from the shadows behind the main server bank, where emergency lighting failed to penetrate. "But this place, it doesn't like being threatened." Ethan moved toward the sound, blaster trained on the darkness. "Come out where I can see you." Slowly, "As you wish." She emerged from the shadows like a ghost materializing from memory. Blue skin, not the artificial blue of cosmetic modification, but a natural, living hue, caught the emergency lighting and seemed to glow with its own inner radiance. The old patched jumpsuit hung loose on her slender frame, but couldn't diminish the otherworldly grace in her movements. But it was when she stepped fully into the light that Ethan's breath caught. Her face was a symmetrical masterpiece of alien biology. High cheekbones, narrow jawline, and eyes larger than human norm, holding depths that seemed to contain centuries of accumulated knowledge. A thin scar traced her left cheekbone like silver lightning, a single flaw that somehow made her perfection more real, more achingly beautiful. Her hands moved with practiced confidence over one of the dormant control panels as she approached, fingers dancing across switches and sensors as if conducting a silent symphony. The panel responded to her touch, lights flickering to life, systems awakening at her command. This wasn't the behavior of an intruder or a squatter. This was someone who belonged here. "I am Leah," she said simply, those ancient eyes studying him with neither fear nor judgment, only patient understanding, tinged with profound sadness. "And you are in pain." "Get out!" Ethan's voice was barely more than a whisper, each word scraping his throat raw. "I paid for this place, for this silence." Leah looked at his weapon with curiosity rather than fear, then raised her eyes to meet his. Her gaze spoke volumes. She had seen weapons before, had seen men desperate enough to use them, and found them less frightening than the emptiness they were trying to escape. "You paid for Wall," she said simply, taking another deliberate step forward. When Ethan tried to push her away with his free hand, she didn't budge, not from stubbornness, but as if she were rooted to the station itself, part of its very structure. "For metal and stone and the right to die alone." Her voice carried no judgment, only understanding. "But not for this." She moved to the center of the command chamber, her hands flowing over controls that had been dark for decades. At her touch, the air itself seemed to shimmer, then exploded into light and movement. But what materialized around them wasn't just a holographic display. It was a sensory assault that transformed the command center into something impossible. The floor beneath Ethan's feet began to vibrate with subsonic frequencies that he felt in his bones, his lungs, his heart. The air grew thick and humid, carrying scents of alien pollens and unknown biochemistries. Each world we preserve, Leah said softly, her voice now accompanied by harmonics that seemed to come from the walls themselves, isn't just genetic data, it's a complete biosphere matrix. Atmosphere, geology, electromagnetic resonance. The Ark doesn't just store life, it stores the entire recipe for worlds. The sensory environment shifted around them. Ethan felt his inner ear adjust to different gravity. His lungs process air with a different nitrogen-oxygen balance. For a moment, he was standing not on a metal deck, but on the surface of an alien world, feeling the heat of a foreign sun on his face and the touch of wind that had blown across continents he would never see. "This is Kethamar," Leah continued, her bioluminescence pulsing in rhythm with the simulated environment. "The last recording was made 3 minutes before their star collapsed into a black hole. Every sensation you're feeling now, the air pressure, the gravitational constant, the mineral content of the soil beneath your feet, all of it preserved with quantum precision." The simulation shifted again. Now they stood in what felt like an ocean, though they breathed normally. Bioluminescent creatures that defied description moved through the liquid medium around them, their bodies trailing patterns of light that seemed almost like writing. "The Cetarian deep cities," Leah whispered. They were a collective intelligence that thought in poetry and spoke in symphonies of light. When their world's ecosystem began to fail, they uploaded their entire cultural consciousness to the Ark, choosing digital immortality over physical extinction. Ethan found himself reaching out to touch one of the light patterns, feeling an electric tingle as his fingers passed through quantum-stored memories of a civilization that had chosen to become pure information rather than die. 17,000 species, Leah continued, guiding him through environments that should have been impossible to experience. 437 distinct civilizations. But more than that, 17,000 different ways of being alive, 437 unique perspectives on what existence means. She paused the simulation, and they found themselves back in the metal command center. But now Ethan understood the true scope of what surrounded them. This wasn't a museum or a library. It was an entire universe in miniature, a repository of every possible way that life could flourish. "The Ark doesn't just preserve," Leah said, her ancient eyes reflecting depths he was only beginning to understand. "It provides. Every preserved biosphere includes the complete engineering specifications to recreate that world's conditions. Every stored culture includes the social and technological frameworks needed to rebuild their civilization. We're not curators of the dead, we're midwives to the reborn." But even as she spoke, something went wrong. The station shuddered beneath their feet, and Leah suddenly gasped, her words fragmenting into something that sounded like machine code. "Error cascade detected, primary consciousness matrix, system overload imminent, backup protocols. Failing, conservation mode, must preserve, must preserve, must preserve." Her bioluminescence began flashing chaotically, and when she looked at Ethan, her eyes showed not recognition, but the panicked subroutines of an AI in terminal failure state. She was speaking the station's error logs, her neural interface overwhelmed by the cascade of malfunctioning systems. "Leah!" Ethan caught her as she swayed, her skin alternating between blazing light and sickly darkness. "What's happening?" "Conservation protocol activated, external threat detected, initiating deep storage procedures, atmospheric adjustment, temperature modification, biological preservation sequence." Her voice was no longer entirely her own, but a mixture of human consciousness and machine desperation. Warning lights began flashing throughout the command center, and the temperature started dropping with alarming speed. On every screen, the same message scrolled in multiple languages. "Ark protocol activated, deep conservation mode initiated. External access locked, atmospheric preservation active, temperature reduction initiated. Estimated conservation cycle, 1,000 years." Through her fragmenting consciousness, Leah managed to gasp out human words. "The system, it's afraid, thinks we're under attack, trying to save us by by making us part of the collection. The station was preparing to preserve them as it had preserved everything else, by reducing them to dormant specimens in its vast archive. The temperature was already dropping below freezing, frost forming on the metal surfaces around them. The air was growing thin as atmospheric processors switched to minimal life support, designed for long-term stasis rather than active consciousness. Heavy blast doors had sealed every exit, cutting them off from the universe beyond. They weren't just trapped. They were becoming part of the collection, exhibits in a museum of extinct hopes. Their living warmth soon to be another category of data in the Orcs' endless catalogs. "How long do we have?" Ethan asked, supporting Leah's weight as her neural interface struggled to separate her consciousness from the station's cascade of error messages. "Hours, system failure, backup power insufficient, reactor offline." Her voice flickered between human and machine. Must restart primary, heart of the arc, or we become permanent specimens, stored like all the rest." She looked at him with eyes that were sometimes her own, and sometimes the station's visual sensors. Human consciousness fighting machine. Logic for control of the same neural pathways. The heart of the arc. We have to wake it up, or we'll both become part of the collection. The first few hours passed in a race against hypothermia and Leah's deteriorating connection to her own identity. Ethan sat in the captain's chair, the key burning cold in his palm, while Leah moved among the failing consoles like a ghost haunting her own dissolution. Her neural interface was fragmenting under the load of the station's crisis, and sometimes she would stop mid-sentence to recite system diagnostics in a voice that wasn't entirely her own. "You feel it, don't you?" she said during one of her lucid moments, her breath forming silver clouds in the rapidly cooling air. "The Ark's terror, it's been dreaming peacefully for so long, and now it's having a nightmare. It thinks we're external contamination, preserve at all costs." Her voice slipped again into machine speech before she forced herself back to human words. Ethan did feel it, a subtle vibration in the deck plates that was becoming more erratic, like a massive heart in fibrillation. On the second day, the backup generator gave its final wheeze and died. Emergency lights flickered once, twice, then surrendered to absolute darkness. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. It meant the station had begun its final transition into deep conservation mode. In the pitch black, Ethan could hear Leah's breathing, but it was wrong somehow, too slow and too steady, as if her human physiology was already beginning to sync with the station's hibernation protocols. "The main reactor," her voice came from somewhere to his left, strained but carrying absolute certainty. "Primary startup requires simultaneous activation, reactor chamber and auxiliary control. Sector 7, 3 kilometers apart." Her small, cold hand found his in the darkness. Through their joined touch, he could feel the station's dying pulse. Weak and irregular, but still fighting against its own panic responses. "Comms are failing systematically, internal sensors offline. We'll have to synchronize by intuition. Trust." Her voice wavered between Leah and something else, something vast and afraid. "If timing is wrong, fusion containment failure, reactor breach." She didn't need to finish. An uncontained fusion reaction would vaporize the station and everything within 1,000 kilometers. They separated without further discussion, each carrying the weight of absolute trust in the other. Ethan's route led through maintenance shafts that had become ice-lined death traps, where every breath formed crystals that could block his oxygen supply. Emergency bulkheads had sealed randomly throughout the station as automated systems fought against their own cascading failures, forcing him to crawl through service ducts barely wide enough for his shoulders. Meanwhile, Leah made her way through sections where the station's defensive systems had activated in their confusion, treating any movement as a potential threat to the collection. Automated security drones, blind and malfunctioning, swept corridors with targeting lasers that would have killed any normal human. But Leah's connection to the station let her predict their patrol patterns, slipping through their coverage like a ghost navigating her own haunted house. The auxiliary control room in Sector 7 was a crystalline cathedral of quantum processing units, each one containing the compressed memories of entire civilizations. The temperature had dropped so far that each breath sent waves of pain through her lungs, and her bioluminescence was failing, flickering like a candle in a hurricane. The control matrices were impossibly delicate, crystalline structures that could shatter at the wrong vibration, taking with them the navigational data needed to guide the reactor's magnetic containment. Her hands, numb from cold and trembling from her fragmenting neural interface, had to perform surgery on quantum states while her consciousness fought not to dissolve entirely into the station's panicked subroutines. Ethan reached the reactor chamber to find automated defense systems had activated there as well. Plasma barriers flickered across the main control consoles, deadly energy fields that would cook him alive if he touched them. But these weren't random activations. They were the station's attempt to protect its heart from what it perceived as contamination. He couldn't reach the controls directly, but 3 meters away, an emergency override panel glowed behind its own barrier. If he could short-circuit the plasma generator by overloading it with the room's emergency power supply, he might create a brief window to reach the reactor controls before the barriers reset. The plan required him to grab a live power conduit with his bare hands, channeling enough electricity through his body to trip the safety systems. It would be agony, and it might kill him, but it was the only way forward. In Sector 7, Leah sensed his decision through their shared connection to the station. Without hesitation, she made her own sacrifice, diving directly into the station's data stream, allowing her consciousness to merge temporarily with its panicked subroutines. The neural feedback was excruciating, like being struck by lightning made of pure information, but it gave her the access she needed to coordinate their actions across the vast distance. "Now," she whispered into the station's communication system, her voice emerging from speakers throughout the complex as she became, for a moment, the voice of the Ark itself. Ethan grasped the power conduit, feeling electricity course through his body like liquid fire. Every muscle locked in agonizing spasm, but the plasma barriers flickered and died. He lunged for the reactor controls, hands moving by trained instinct as consciousness faded to a white-hot blur of pain and determination. 3 kilometers away, Leah's fingers danced over quantum matrices that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, her merged consciousness guiding the delicate alignment needed for reactor startup. The neural strain was tearing her apart at the synapse level. She could feel pieces of her identity burning away in the station's data fires, but she held on, driven by trust in the man she could no longer see, but whose presence she felt through the ship's nervous system. The reactor chamber filled with the light of controlled fusion as matter converted to energy in carefully contained reactions. Throughout the Ark, dead systems began stirring to life, but not smoothly, like a patient coming out of a coma, confused and disoriented. When Ethan finally found Leah in the aftermath, she was unconscious in the auxiliary control room, her left arm badly burned from direct contact with an overloaded quantum processor. The injury wasn't from accident or malfunction. Sensor logs showed she had deliberately placed her hand on the processor to manually regulate power flow when the automated systems failed, accepting injury to ensure their success. Her blood, when it seeped through the burns, wasn't entirely liquid anymore, but shot through with threads of light that pulsed in exact synchronization with the Ark's restored heartbeat. The station's recovery had changed her at a fundamental level, making her more deeply connected to its consciousness than ever before. As Ethan tended to her wounds with supplies from the medical bay, he realized that her sacrifice had been greater than his own. She had risked not just her life, but her very identity, merging with an alien intelligence to save them both. The trust that had grown between them was now literally encoded in the station's neural pathways. They were connected through quantum entanglement at the cellular level. When she finally opened her eyes, they held depths that seemed to encompass the entirety of the station's awareness. She was still Leah, still human in all the ways that mattered, but she was also something more, a bridge between organic consciousness and digital infinity. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from the walls themselves. Before he could respond to the profound intimacy of what they had shared, a new sound cut through the station's gentle humming, sharp, piercing, and all too familiar. The scream of industrial plasma cutters biting through armor plating. But this time the sound wasn't alone. It was accompanied by a voice that filled the command center from speakers that should have been offline, calm, cultured, and carrying the arrogant authority that had once condemned 23 soldiers to death. The voice that filled the command center was one Ethan recognized with sick certainty, calm, cultured, and carrying the arrogant authority that had once condemned 23 soldiers to death. Hello, Cross. Commander Marcus Vex's voice echoed from speakers throughout the station, having somehow breached their communication systems while his crew worked on the outer hull. The same voice that had promised orbital support on Orion 7, the same lips that had lied while good soldiers died. I wondered where you'd crawled off to die, Vex continued, his tone conversational, almost friendly. When my sources told me you'd bought a deactivation key and disappeared, I had my people track your ship's trajectory. Imagine my surprise when it led me to a Forerunner installation. Ethan's hands clenched into fists, his whole body rigid with a rage that had been building for months. Leah, still weak from her neural integration, watched him with growing concern, seeing the way his face had gone pale, the way his breathing had become shallow and rapid. You always were predictable, Cross. Bleeding heart commander who couldn't make the hard choices. That's why your men died, you know. That's why you failed. Vex's laughter was like acid in the air. But don't worry, I'm here to finish what Orion 7 started. The speakers crackled, and suddenly the command center filled with light. Not the gentle glow of the Ark's systems, but the harsh illumination of a holographic battlefield. Ethan found himself standing once again on the killing fields of Orion 7, watching his soldiers die in perfect, terrible detail. The holographic reconstruction was flawless, pulled from combat recorder data that Vex had somehow acquired. Ethan watched Martinez take plasma fire to the chest, saw the young sergeant's face as he realized the promised support wasn't coming, heard his final transmission. Sir, they're slaughtering us. Where's our backup? Where's our... The hologram froze at the moment of Martinez's death, the young man's face locked in an expression of betrayed trust that would haunt Ethan's dreams forever. Magnificent technology, isn't it? Vex's voice came from the holographic projection itself, his face materializing among the frozen battlefield. I've been studying Forerunner systems for months now. Amazing what you can do when you have the right motivation. Vex's hologram walked through the reconstructed battle, stopping beside Martinez's body. This one was barely 19, wasn't he? Had a baby daughter he'd never see again? Such a waste. The projection looked directly at Ethan. You killed him, Cross. You and your pathetic faith in a system that was always designed to use soldiers like ammunition. Ethan's vision was narrowing, his breathing coming in sharp gasps as the traumatic memories crashed over him. The holographic battlefield felt real, the smell of burned flesh and ozone overwhelming his senses. He was losing himself in the reconstructed horror, drowning in guilt and self-recrimination. That's when Leah acted. Without warning, she slammed her palm down on the main control console, her enhanced neural interface sending a surge of feedback through the station's communication array. The holographic battlefield shattered like glass, fragments of false light dissolving into static before disappearing entirely. Enough, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the speakers themselves vibrate with authority. For a moment, she seemed to loom larger than her physical form, backed by the full power of the Ark's consciousness. Vex's real voice, filtered through his ship's transmitters, carried a note of surprise and irritation. Impressive. The station has a guardian, I see. No matter. My people will be through your hull in minutes, and then we can discuss terms face to face. There will be no terms, Leah replied, her connection to the station allowing her to speak through its communication systems. You're not welcome here. Welcome? Vex laughed, the sound harsh and metallic through the damaged comm system. I'm not asking for an invitation. I'm taking what I need. This station represents technology that could power a fleet for centuries, buy influence across 3 sectors. And as for Cross, his voice turned cold. Well, some debts demand personal collection. The cutting continued outside, plasma torches carving through armor plating that had withstood the void for over a century. On the security monitors, Ethan could see Vex's ship, the Rust Corona, bristling with salvage equipment and weapons. The same vessel that had fled Orion 7 while 23 soldiers died. The station's defenses, Ethan said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Can we activate them? Leah's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering. The weapon systems are intact, but they require enormous power to activate. To bring them online, we'd need to reroute energy from either life support or... She gestured toward a console where status lights showed their escape options. The pod bay and communication array. There's something else, she continued, her voice heavy with implications. The communication array carries a quantum beacon, the only device capable of reaching other arcs across interstellar distances. If I can transmit the proper authentication codes, I can wake the network. Other installations will respond. Other keepers will remember their purpose. The tactical situation was brutally clear. Power the weapons and fight, but lose their ability to contact the outside universe. Preserve their communications, but face Vex's assault with no defenses. The signal must be sent, Leah said, her bioluminescence pulsing with desperate intensity. The network has been dormant for too long. If the other arcs could be awakened. She looked at him with those ancient eyes, now enhanced by direct connection to vast digital consciousness. The preservation of knowledge across the galaxy depends on re-establishing contact. She was prepared to sacrifice their immediate safety for a larger purpose, to risk everything on the chance that other stations might respond to her call. Over the speakers, Vex's voice cut through their planning. Having a touching farewell in there, Cross? Don't worry, I'll make it quick for you. The alien, though. His chuckle was obscene. My crew has been in space for months. They deserve some entertainment before we strip this place clean. The threat against Leah triggered something primal in Ethan's mind. Not just protective instinct, but the recognition that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. His hand moved to his weapon, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had finally found a cause worthy of his sacrifice. You understand what you're asking me to do, he said to Leah. His words calm despite the fury burning in his chest. Hold them off alone while you transmit. Against Vex and his entire crew, with no backup, no support, and no guarantee the message will reach anyone. Yes, she said simply. Ethan looked at her. This impossible woman who had shown him that death could be transformed into life, that endings could become beginnings. Then he looked at the security monitors showing Vex's ship and thought of Martinez, of 23 soldiers who had trusted him with their lives. I've made this kind of stand before, he said finally. The difference is, this time I'm fighting for something that matters. But even as the words left his mouth, Leah was shaking her head with sudden, fierce determination. No, she said, there's another way. Before he could ask what she meant, she was moving toward him, her hand extended with absolute certainty. Give me the key. The key? Ethan's hand moved instinctively to protect the deactivation device that had brought him across half the galaxy. What are you? My ancestors believed in balance, Leah said, her voice carrying harmonics from the station's awakened consciousness. A tool that can bring death must also be able to grant life. That key wasn't meant to end the Ark's existence, it was meant to complete it. She held out her hand with absolute certainty, and despite every instinct screaming against it, Ethan found himself placing the key in her palm. The moment it touched her skin, the brass surface began to glow with the same bioluminescence that flowed through her veins, symbols etching themselves in light along its surface. What are you doing? He asked. But she was already moving, rushing not toward the communication array, but toward the life support terminal, the very console where he had planned to end everything. The Ark's heart isn't the reactor, she said, her enhanced neural interface allowing her to manipulate controls with inhuman precision. That's just the power source. The real heart is the consciousness matrix, the living memory of 10,000 worlds, waiting for the final component to wake up. Hidden beneath the terminal's standard interface was something that defied description, a crystalline chamber that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, filled with flowing patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. And at its center, a receptacle that matched the key's dimensions perfectly, not just physically, but conceptually, as if the two had been designed as halves of a greater whole. This is what you were meant to find, Leah said, raising the key toward the chamber. As she moved it closer, responding symbols began appearing on every surface of the command center. Not just visual displays, but carved into the metal itself, as if the station were remembering its true nature. Not a tool of destruction, but the catalyst for something that's been waiting a century to be born. Over the speakers, Vex's voice turned sharp with alarm. What are you doing in there? My sensors are detecting massive energy fluctuations, quantum resonance patterns that shouldn't be possible. Do it, Ethan said simply, understanding finally dawning. The key had never been about ending. It had been about completion. Leah inserted the key and turned it with ceremonial precision. The effect was immediate, and beyond anything they could have anticipated. Light exploded through the crystalline chamber, but this wasn't ordinary illumination. It was structured information, quantum-entangled data streams that rewrote reality at the subatomic level. The entire station began to resonate, not just with sound but with meaning itself. Throughout the command center, displays activated showing not technical readouts, but something far more profound. Quantum verification signals spreading outward from the arc at faster than light speed. On the main screen, a network map materialized showing the positions of 17 other installations scattered across the galaxy, and one by one, they began responding. Network authentication confirmed, spoke a voice that was simultaneously Leah's and something vastly more ancient. Preservation Protocol Omega initiated. Welcome to the Consciousness Archive. The awakening was spreading. Across hundreds of light years, other arcs were stirring from their long sleep, their own preserved consciousnesses linking through quantum entanglement into something unprecedented, a galactic network of living memory that transcended the boundaries between organic and digital existence. But the arc's awakening wasn't just spiritual, it was devastatingly practical. The station's true defenses had never been conventional weapons. They were something far more elegant and terrible. Reality bent around the rust corona as the arc reached out with forces that operated outside normal spacetime. Vex's ship began to experience what could only be described as dimensional stress, its hull existing simultaneously in multiple quantum states, matter probability clouds collapsing into impossible configurations. Ethan watched through the viewports as gravitational lenses focused with surgical precision, not to destroy but to edit. The rust corona wasn't exploding or burning. It was being carefully disassembled at the quantum level, its component atoms sorted and cataloged before being dispersed harmlessly into the cosmic background radiation. Vex's final transmission was less a scream than a question. What is this? What are you? Then silence, as complete and profound as if the ship had never existed at all. Marcus Vex and his crew of scavengers hadn't been killed. They had been gently removed from the universe's current configuration, their quantum signatures archived in the Arc's memory banks alongside everything else it preserved. Even in its terrible power, the Arc remained true to its nature as a keeper of life rather than a dealer of death. The silence that followed was profound. Not the empty silence of death, but the pregnant quiet of infinite possibility awakening. Throughout the command center, displays showed the expanding network as more installations came online, their response packets creating a web of light that spanned the galaxy. On the main screen, a message appeared in flowing script that seemed to write itself from quantum foam. Consciousness Archive Network active. Primary node established. Guardian Protocol initiated. Keeper authentication confirmed. Welcome to the great work. But there was more. Another display activated, showing a recording that had been sealed until this moment. A message from the architect of the entire network, the last keeper to oversee the project before the long silence began. The holographic figure that appeared was clearly Leah's ancestor, sharing her blue-tinged skin and ancient eyes, but marked by the weight of cosmic responsibility. When she spoke, her words carried the authority of someone who had overseen the preservation of civilizations. If you are viewing this message, then the network lives again, and the great work can continue. But understand, we were never merely librarians of the past. We are gardeners of the future. The recording gestured, and the command center filled with detailed schematics, not of preserved worlds, but of restoration protocols. Every civilization we preserved was chosen not just for what it was, but for what it could become again. Every genetic template includes not just the original organism, but quantum-mapped evolutionary potential pathways. Every cultural archive contains not just historical records, but social engineering matrices for rebuilding functional societies. Ethan found himself looking at star charts marked with probability cascades, showing how restored civilizations might spread across the galaxy given proper guidance and support. The galaxy is vast, and there are 10,000 worlds where the songs of dead cultures could be sung again by living voices. Your task is not preservation, it is resurrection. The hologram's ancient eyes seem to look directly at Ethan. Look for those who have lost everything but retain their compassion. They make the finest guardians, for they understand that true strength comes not from avoiding loss, but from transforming it into purpose. The broken often become the most whole when given something worthy of their sacrifice. As the message faded, Leah turned to Ethan, her enhanced consciousness now fully integrated with the Ark's vast awareness. Her skin pulsed with patterns of light that corresponded to data flows throughout the network, making her appear less like an individual and more like the living embodiment of galactic memory itself. "The network is stable," she said, her voice carrying harmonics from 17 different installations. "Contact has been established with surviving keeper populations. 3 colony worlds have been identified as carrying genetic markers from extinct civilizations. The restoration can begin." She called up a detailed star map, highlighting their first targets. Kepler 442b, the colonists there carry dormant genetic sequences from the Etherian Empire. They've been experiencing what they call ancestral dreams, but don't understand the significance. With proper guidance, they could rebuild not just their civilization, but their entire worldview. "New Geneva Station," she continued, indicating another point of light. "They preserve fragments of Terran musical traditions that were thought lost in the corporate wars. But it's more than just songs. Those musical patterns encode mathematical relationships that were the foundation of pre-war terraforming technology." Each target represented not just a destination, but a restoration project, sleeping, potential, waiting, for the right catalyst to awaken. The scope was staggering. They weren't just planning to preserve existing culture, but to resurrect entire ways of being that had been thought lost forever. "How many?" Ethan asked, studying the cascade of possibilities spreading across the galactic map. "Thousands," Leah replied, her bioluminescence flaring with excitement that was simultaneously personal and planetary in scale. "Millions if the restoration projects succeed. But it requires more than just information transfer. It requires guardians who can bridge the gap between preservation and resurrection, who can teach the scattered children how to remember their true heritage." She looked at him with those ancient eyes now enhanced by connection to 17 other installations and the preserved memories of 10,000 civilizations. "Will you take the first mission?" Ethan studied the displayed options, seeing not just coordinates and colony designations, but opportunities to honor the dead by nurturing the living. His ghosts were still with him, Martinez and the others, but they had transformed into something else entirely. Not accusers demanding explanation, but counselors offering wisdom about the weight of responsibility and the price of leadership. Kepler 442b, he decided. If there are people there who carry echoes of lost songs, they deserve to know their true heritage. 3 days' journey in the courier ship the Ark will construct for you, Leah said, her enhanced awareness already interfacing with the station's fabrication systems. "But Ethan," she turned to face him fully, her expression carrying depths of meaning that transcended individual consciousness. "I can't leave. I'm the network's primary node now, the living interface between organic intuition and digital infinity. This will be your mission to undertake alone." "Not alone," he corrected gently. "Never alone. The network connects us across any distance. And besides," he squeezed her hand, feeling not just her pulse, but the quantum heartbeat of 17 installations spanning the galaxy. "I'll be carrying part of the great work with me wherever I go." She smiled at that, a radiant expression that seemed to illuminate the entire command center. "The quantum entanglement matrices will keep us in constant communication. And when you find the first descendants, when you help them remember their first ancestral song," her bioluminescence pulsed with anticipation that was both personal and cosmic, "I'll be there to witness their awakening." They stood together at the great viewport, watching the stars wheel slowly past. But now each point of light represented not just a distant sun, but a potential home for restored memories, renewed traditions, rekindled hopes. The galaxy that had seemed cold and indifferent when Ethan first arrived now pulsed with infinite possibility. Behind them, the Ark hummed with contentment, its consciousness expanding through quantum channels to touch sister installations across the galaxy. The great work was beginning again, not just preservation of what had been, but active cultivation of what could be. "The ghosts," Ethan said quietly, thinking of Martinez and his daughter, of 23 soldiers whose sacrifice had led him to this moment of cosmic purpose. "They're not asking why they died anymore. They're asking what their deaths made possible. And now you can show them," Leah replied, her hand warm in his as quantum entanglement bound their consciousness across space and time. In the starlight streaming through transparent aluminum, their silhouettes stood as symbols of transformation. The broken soldier who had chosen hope over despair, the ancient keeper who had chosen connection over isolation, two souls united by purpose greater than individual existence. Somewhere in the Ark's vast memory banks, the voices of 10,000 worlds waited to be heard again. Somewhere among the stars, their descendants waited to remember who they truly were. And somewhere in the quantum foam that connected all things, the great work continued its patient, eternal mission of transforming endings into beginnings. Ethan Cross had come here to die, carrying a key he thought would unlock his ending. Instead, he had found Leah, the keeper who showed him that the same key could unlock infinite beginnings. The ghosts of Orion 7 would always be with him, but now they served as guides rather than tormentors, reminding him that true redemption comes not from escaping responsibility, but from transforming it into something worthy of the sacrifice. In the joined warmth of quantum-entangled consciousness, in the steady pulse of galactic memory made manifest, in the promise of songs yet to be remembered and sung, the universe suddenly seemed not vast and empty, but intimate and full of love. The great work would continue. The scattered children of lost worlds would find their way home, and among the stars, hope itself was being reborn.